Well, I think one of the most universally acclaimed characters and well-known detectives is got to be Sherlock Holmes.
Undoubtedly, and it's been done by a director who's really getting into his stride, who's just done hit after hit.
Yeah, this is Guy Ritchie breaking the mold a little bit from what he did, but still in the same sort of line of work. And obviously working with Robert Downey Jr., who was in the middle of the best period of his career. But Sherlock Holmes being public domain, I think, opens up the character to a lot of different interpretations.
So, Arthur Doyle's character has been just rewritten so many times, and this is definitely one of the more definitive versions of it.
Yeah, the movie was a big success, and on a large budget as well, about 90 million.
Sergeant Inspector Lestrade asked that you come with me right away.
It's Lord Blackwood, sir. It appears he's come back from the grave.
The game's afoot.
Follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry God for Harry, England, and St. George.
You're not taking this seriously, are you, Holmes?
Yes, as you should.
Just widen your gaze. I'm concerned you underestimate the gravity of coming events. What's he after, anyway?
I need your help.
Well, the great benefit of being a consulting detective is that I can pick and choose my client.
We know you don't believe in magic, Mr. Holmes. We don't expect you to share our faith, merely our fear.
She's the only adversary who ever outsmarted you.
This man intrigues me, Watson. He's got Adler on edge. So now you're curious as to whether there's a larger game afoot.
It's a matter of professional integrity.
Watson!
Don't!
How did you see that?
Because I was looking for it.
Solve this. Whatever it takes.
This game was designed to hurt.
There was never any magic.
Only conjuring tricks.
The movie starts off straight in the action with the high-speed chase.
Definitely. And I absolutely adored the retro theme, but was also almost modernized.
Yeah, it was Hans Zimmer doing the score on this one, and I think when you say Hans Zimmer, it's already clear what you mean. Then when Holmes is sneaking around the crypt, he gets a tap on the shoulder and you think he's about to be taken out.
And that's when John Watson comes in, and we just see how calm both of them are, how this is something they've done 1,000 times before.
Yeah, it's made very clear that this is an experienced version of Holmes.
So why not? In considerable experience.
And as well, it's also made clear that this is a version of both of them are going to be quite physical characters, whereas, obviously they're not always depicted that way. And then we see the presence of the occult with Blackwood doing the ceremony.
They run down and try to interrupt it, and we see again how they're very physical, how they always go into the fight.
Yeah, and I did like how Watson here is very physical, very strong in his attacks, whereas Sherlock shows a bit more finesse and kind of tactics.
It really brings up both of their backgrounds, how Sherlock Holmes is a genius, but Watson, he's a military man.
And then we get the great scene where when he stops Blackwood.
Let me show you how much I've enjoyed it.
Watson!
Don't!
Observe.
How did you see that?
Because I was looking for it.
Lord Blackwood.
And I think that encapsulates the entirety of Blackwood's character just instantly right there. Because if it went true, it would have looked like he just killed John with his bare hand. But we now know it's just a trick. And we learned earlier, the reason why Holmes and Watson were alone, even though they have the entirety of Scotland Yard with him, is because it'd be too slow.
Holmes does keep on giving him accreditation for saving crimes by keeping himself out of the newspapers. So then we see Watson moving out of Baker Street.
They quite organically build his dynamic with Holmes. How he hears Holmes shooting the wall, and he just tells his friend, oh no, he's just hammering nails. He's covering for Holmes. He wants Holmes to look better.
We get a very quick understanding, even though most people probably know these characters already and what they're going to be like in this story specifically.
Then we see Sherlock at the diner scene, and we get a very fascinating look into his life, how without a purpose, without an objective, he just starts noticing all the small details.
And then we get an idea of kind of how he views other people than Watson when he's speaking to Mary.
Both Mary and Watson leave. One of the scenes I absolutely adored in this first movie was the slow-mo fight where Sherlock predicted what was going to happen. And we hear the music of The Rocky Road to Dublin, which is a very famous Irish song. It's a very, like, Irish kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's something that's done very well in these movies is that Holmes is able to ingratiate himself into many different classes of Victorian London and Europe as well. And it kind of shows that, like, what he mightn't get people, he understands their situation. And then he notices the handkerchiefs of Irene Adler.
And then we see the second instance of the Sherlock vision.
Analyze his fight pattern.
Countermeasures ready.
Let's kick his ass. This mustn't register on an emotional level. First, discombobulate. Then, discombobulate. In summary, ears ringing, jaw fractured, 3 ribs cracked, 4 broken, diaphragm hemorrhaging, physical recovery 6 weeks, full psychological recovery 6 months.
Then we get first introduced to Irene Adler.
Yeah, and it's kind of hinted that this is like a third or fourth meeting of the two and that they had some sort of relationship in the past. Yeah, they've got like a kind of flirtatious banter between them, and you can kind of get the idea there was a relationship there.
And it seemed logical to bring Irene back. They met once in Scandal in Bohemia. I would suggest that maybe they met again. She broke his heart, and now they meet again.
But this version of Adler is more kind of like an agent than what she was in the original.
And she actually gives Sherlock the case.
We see her visiting some mysterious guy in a carriage.
And I absolutely love the retake where we learn about Holmes was also being there in disguise.
So I think one thing that can't go unnoticed is when he jumps out the window and goes,
Holmes! Where are you going?
What's that? And then it was quite interesting as we see Moriarty. And then Blackwood makes the request to see Holmes, and they eventually meet up with each other.
Yeah, and I think it's the reaction of the rest of the police that kind of gives again the idea that there's magic involved in this somehow.
Blackwood didn't need Holmes. He very much was like Holmes and was like Moriarty, where he absolutely adored the game. And I think that's a very underrated part of his character.
Yeah, well, personally, I spent a lot of time thinking about why Blackwood involved Holmes at all. And the only conclusion I can come to is Holmes was the only guy who could stop him, so he's trying to mentally break Holmes, underestimating him.
That was the plan. Not a great plan.
Blackwood prophesizes that he's going to kill 3 people.
Sherlock mentions how his 6th ritual was very sloppy.
Yeah, and then Blackwood retorts that you think there's a bigger game afoot, which obviously there is.
Yes, and then Blackwood's hanged.
Which Watson supervises.
And then, not soon after that, Sherlock Holmes is called again, because Blackwood is alive now.
You're supposed to be dead!
Am I not?
And then Holmes says one of his iconic quotes when they leave and begin, to open up a case on Blackwood, really.
Was resurrected.
The question is not if, but how. The game's afoot.
After convincing Watson to see through his last case.
And we also see how Holmes is almost manipulated Watson. I love how Watson was actually the one who deduces the stuff from the watch, using Holmes' method.
Holmes pretends the whole time that he doesn't know, what's happening, and it's Watson who's doing everything, as Holmes leads them to Watson's conclusion.
M-H. M-H is for
Madison and Hague.
They should be able to give us an address.
What a coincidence.
I do like how Watson isn't able to contain himself as he says he's got to go, but when he realizes Holmes going in there by himself, he just has to go in with him.
And we see all the experiments and all the things he's done.
A bunch of information is given to you at once, which you will kind of overlook, and as we see all the different pieces that will be used as magic later on.
2 officers run into the building. Holmes asks who does Watson want to fight, and Watson makes the 2 smaller guys.
Meat. Or potatoes.
My 10 minutes are up.
So yeah, it's a pretty cool fight scene, and there's a bit of humor in the middle.
Comment s'il vous plaît?
Je suis pas pressé.
You alright?
Honestly, I didn't quite like the fight. I thought it was way too cartoonish for what the atmosphere of the movie was trying to be.
I think this just comes from Guy Ritchie's background of making sort of crime movies with an element of comedy in them. 'Cause I think this movie visually is fantastic the whole way through.
Extremely creative as well. Like, whenever you think of this movie, and even Guy Ritchie movies in general, you do think of those slow motion fight scenes.
The way he films like technical shots with this dynamic camera, the use of VFX with practical locations, it just looks really good the whole way.
Both of them end up in prison. We see how Mary bails Watson out, but Holmes! When he eventually gets bailed out, it's for people who need him.
I need your help.
So then Holmes goes to the Secret Order of the Four Temples, their name.
The people in there start to try to hire him.
Name your price.
Captain Price.
And Sherlock says,
Well, the great benefit of being a consulting detective is that I can pick and choose my clients. So consider it done, I'll stop you. But not for you. And certainly not for a price.
then Holmes meets up with Adler.
It's interesting here because he smelled the tea earlier when she came to his house, but then he just drinks the wine straight away. I wonder if like his nerves were at him, or if maybe his guard was down having had a good experience with her earlier. I did like the exposition where when Watson's talking about Adler's relationship with Holmes.
I don't have a relationship with him, okay?
Where I think it was kind of just a clever way to express it.
Why is the only woman you've ever cared about a world-class criminal? Are you a masochist?
Allow me to explain.
Allow me. She's the only adversary who ever outsmarted you. Twice. Made a proper idiot out of you.
Such a weird death scene Rodham had. It was another one of the weird visuals where you actually didn't know what was going on.
It's a very dark scene. It's almost kind of demonic the way it's filmed with like the eyes.
You didn't understand how Blackwood got in, and you started actually thinking of magic.
Yeah, or doors.
Knock, knock.
I do like the visual and the method in which Holmes figures out about the secret room. And then there's a very cool shot where
Lord Blackwood
made leader of the temple. And I think here the way Mark Strong portrays it very seriously.
And then I absolutely loved the surprise twist of Standish setting himself on fire.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
How do you think of the next scene where Sherlock
Tries
to egg John on?
Yeah, the way he sort of fishes for John and gets John to find the warehouse for him and then leaves his gun. It shows that like they have this great relationship together where they both know each other very well. And even though Watson knows what's happening, he still goes along with him anyway because he knows that Holmes needs him.
I suppose his neck didn't survive the impact of Dredge landing on him.
Yes. Thanks for that, by the way.
Well done, Watson. Let's lead us right to Blackwood, dead or alive.
Not us. You.
Yes. Just a figure of speech, old boy.
He's left it there on purpose.
Blackwood's able to like suddenly appear. We see Holmes isn't super rational, he just shoots the wall repeatedly.
That he has Adler in a trap.
Then the scene after where Watson goes over the tripwire trying to get after Blackwood, I think it's really well shot and it's quite dramatic as well the way we see Watson explode and we think that Adler and Holmes are also going down.
I thought the only thing that we took away from it is it's such a weird music choice.
But then when he recovers, we see that there's a warrant issued by Coward to arrest Holmes and it's Constable Clark who gets him out under Lestrade's orders.
John recovering and Sherlock in disguise trying to help him out.
And it's a kind of an interesting scene then when Mary says to him, you know, he'd have wanted you to solve the case and keep going. It kind of reminds me of that bit in Rocky 2 when she's like, win, Rocky, win.
Yes, Adler tries to flee and Moriarty's just there.
I do like as well that there's a third party interested in the events of the movie, because obviously we expect Holmes to get the advantage at some point. Where you see the whole movie come together and it kind of explains to you how all the clues fit together. Because the revelation in a detective movie, often you can't make it, but it is very satisfying to see it happen. And then Lestrade comes in and arrests him. At this point we think that Lestrade has, turned on Holmes and is every bit as bad as we previously thought he was.
He ends up bringing him to Coward and reveals that he's a part of the Order. And we truly do think this is the end of Holmes. How could Holmes plan for this?
And he doesn't, and he dies.
Yeah, great ending to the movie. Holmes managed to easily outwit Coward.
We are giving the weak masses a strong shepherd. Don't you see that it's their own?
And we get a very nice tie back into the beginning of the movie where we think that we're done with that scene's level of detail and there's still further to explore in it. Guy Ritchie movies are kind of famous for their use of timelines and showing you the same scenes but with more information.
And we learned that Sherlock actually planned this out with Lestrade.
And then Sherlock does a mega cool dive out to the boat, and then Irene just starts shooting the place up.
And just Holmes and Watson look at each other and well, for fuck's sake.
But one thing I do like is that Watson uses his gun as a tool, probably with his military experience, whereas Holmes isn't as used to using his, so he only uses it when he's trying to get a shot. During all this, Blackwood's making a speech at the House of Parliament, where he's basically setting up him taking over and trying to invade America.
Across the Atlantic lies a colony that was once ours. It will be again. The Civil War has made them weak. Their government is as corrupt and as ineffective as ours. So we'll take it back.
Adler starts charging down the tunnels, and Holmes pursues her. And Blackwood, who had just been leaving the House of Parliament, sees this going on as well.
And eventually Adler manages to make it up onto Tower Bridge. Sherlock starts to talk to her and tells her to hand over the device.
And then Blackwood sweeps down like that, man, and surprises both of them.
He ends up taking the device off Adler. She tries to pull her gun on him, but he just swats that shit away and eventually pushes her over the edge.
And it's a very cool fight scene with the camera moving around them. It's shot very well, where you obviously see the stakes of falling off Tower Bridge.
Holmes, seeing that his leg's tied around a rope, drops an anchor off the side of the bridge.
And we're seeing again what we've seen throughout this movie, where Holmes, he's not necessarily the most skilled fighter, but he's able to use his brain and tactics as he does in every part of the story.
We see Blackwood dangling off the edge. Sherlock starts monologuing and explaining,
There was never any magic. Only conjuring tricks.
Well, I think this is the part of the story that everyone really loves, because we all like hearing the explanation and, the storytelling, and obviously, being a Guy Ritchie movie, he's going to have the fantastic way of showing the shots and the timeline. Also in this scene we see, as throughout the entire movie, Hans Zimmer's fantastic score, which I think really does add a lot to the movie.
Hans Zimmer, he's probably the most iconic musician of all time.
And then just after this, Holmes gives Blackwood the chance to, surrender himself.
Where one of them eventually snaps and he ends up hanging. Then Sherlock has a conversation with Irene Adler.
Yeah, where he confessed that he'll always love her, but it just isn't to be.
Irene tells him about Moriarty.
Yeah, and this sets up the second movie really well, even though it doesn't exactly follow on from what they're saying.
John and Mary go up to say goodbye to Sherlock for the last time.
And Sherlock has already said goodbye for the last time. You can see again that Watson has a familiarity with Holmes, as when he comes in, he has a few moments of shock at seeing Holmes hanging, but then he quickly realizes this is just another trick of his.
We get left with the realization as that it was Moriarty. He wanted to steal the device.
And it's a really elusive version of Moriarty, where we know he's cunning, we know he's got, expert technology, but we don't actually know much about his character, and it leaves the story open as well for a sequel.
What I particularly loved about this ending of it with Moriarty was it also built him up.
As well, the shot of Blackwood hanging's an incredible shot, really, where you see an industrial London which will persevere, and a zooming shot of Blackwood hanging is a very impactful shot to end the story, which has been very good in my opinion. So the strong cast here, obviously, with the big budget, is what makes it such a great movie. Luckily they're able to get back a substantial amount for the sequel.
Where else to stop our titular character, Sherlock Holmes, played by Robert Downey Jr., who was probably near the apex of his career where he was just after Iron Man 1 and 2.
And despite not being British, Robert Downey Jr. is probably the perfect choice for Sherlock Holmes when you think about acting attributes. As you know, he's got the one-liners, he can play intelligent characters, but he's also athletic enough to be in the fight scenes.
You can see a bit of his personal life in Sherlock Holmes in a very bad place at sometimes, emblematic of Sherlock Holmes, where oftentimes when he doesn't have a case, he goes into those very dark places.
Jude Law's John Watson, I think, is also a very good performance, where he plays a Watson that is equally capable, and who's a perfect complement to this version of Sherlock. He puts up with him, but he also likes him at the same time.
So now you're not making any sense. You're not human.
I adored the fact that it was almost a later version of John Watson, and he was a very capable detective, but moreover than that, he was a much better fighter than Sherlock.
As the marketing materials indicated, this really is a version of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. It's not just Sherlock Holmes, despite the titling. I think Mark Strong is
Lord Blackwood
does a very good job as well, where he's playing a character that, you know, could come off as silly, but he plays it so straight, which makes him feel kind of intimidating in a way, and like the line delivery. The aesthetics here obviously do a great job with, you know, the slick back hair and the dark clothing, but as well, I really do think for a substantial portion of this movie, you could think that this guy is a magic character.
Definitely, he gives off that air of intimidation, and he also gives off that little bit of self-confidence where you would believe that he is magical.
As well, the way
Lord Blackwood
always comes from dark areas, you know, I think adds a lot to the mystery to him. Rachel McAdams, coming off of Mean Girls and a few other popular movies, like I think The Notebook, had some real star power, and I think she does a good job here in playing a more original take at the character, where she's like a secret agent and very capable, but at the same time also bouncing dialogue off Holmes. There's a bit of a relationship hinted at there.
Each one of the cast gave stellar performances. While I didn't personally like Rachel McAdams' take on Irene Adler, you can still see there's plenty of quality there.
I think a simple way of talking about Rachel McAdams' performance was her absence for much of Sherlock Holmes 2 was one of the film's biggest complaints, even though it's also a fantastic movie. It was kind of interesting for an actress who's become as accomplished as Kelly Riley that she has such low screen time as Mary. But obviously, if Mary was a huge character in this, I think that would eat away at the plot. So I understand the decision there.
And for the few times she was on screen, she was doing a phenomenal job.
Lestrade and much of the police, like Clark, are kind of interesting, where for much of the narrative you think that they're, you know, your typical incompetent kind of being undermined by Holmes. But we see as the plot unravels is that they actually do a good job, and, you know, they're able to play their part well in taking
Lord Blackwood.
Well, at least this solves the great mystery as to how you became Inspector.
Excuse me, my lord. I've been wanting to do that for a long time.
Another character that's almost identical to that was Captain Tanner. I honestly much preferred him, as he had that bit of rapport with Sherlock and Watson, where they had that incredibly funny scene where they forced Watson to power the boat, while Sherlock and Tanner just got drunk in the back.
They serve their point of the story well. They're not trying to take away emphasis. With the trio of Rotherham, Coward, and Standish, it's nice that we have three characters who appear to believe in magic, and, you know, with three of them coming from all different corners of the earth. It gives a real foundation to this magic order that they're believing in. And obviously, with the later reveal that Coward's actually been with Blackwood all along, it does kind of create this sort of legitimacy again to Blackwood, that even those who previously we thought believed in magic are supporting his cause, and he's able to convince the whole magic crew.
But what I also absolutely adored about it was not all of the magic crew just instantly sided with him. Standish actually decided to fight against Blackwood, and Blackwood managed to use that opportunity to make the entire rest of the cult believe in him.
And then Robert Millay, a former wrestler, does a good job in, you know, the simple role of being the muscle, but also being a bit of comedy and providing a threat, but not being the main villain.
He did play quite well in that secondary antagonist role. I will never like it, as most of his scenes were just way too slapstick for me, especially the shipyard. I personally really enjoyed this movie. I thought the cinematography was phenomenal, and while there were some issues, I still really enjoyed this movie, and I think it's worthy to be a part of the Sherlock Holmes ethos. And while I think all the actors were incredible, I do have to give special props to Robert Downey Jr. in the titular role of Sherlock. He was by far the most entertaining, with an amazing dynamic with Dr. John Watson that I thoroughly enjoyed. One of the biggest issues with this film is not its fault, and that is that in the second movie, they make no mention of Blackwood's device, and I do think it really brings down the coherency of these two films together.
Sherlock Holmes movie was hugely successful, of course, making over 500 million.
Even though this Sherlock Holmes and the next Sherlock Holmes at Game of Shadows did extremely well in the box office, there's been no third movie due to the production issues.
I think these two movies are fantastically written, fantastically presented. They're really, really good movies that I like a lot. I hope there is a third movie, even with all the troubles. I think it'd be worth making.